Welcome to Placecast, a local policy innovation partnership hub production based at the University of Birmingham. Placecast is essential listening for those keen to explore the ins and outs of knowledge mobilisation for influence in central and local government, based on the view that it's only through animating the power of place-based leadership that the wicked problems of 2026 can become more manageable. Whether you're a researcher, citizen scientist, an activist, professional working in the public sector, civil servant, politician, analyst, or entrepreneur, we think that it's through our networks that most solutions can be assembled, tested, and the learning shared before we go again, and that universities can act as the repositories and observatories of these efforts. We are based in City-REDI and rooted in the LPIP programme funded by the ESRC, Innovate UK, and the AHRC. This podcast aims to highlight knowledge and evidence-based ways of working and the strategies needed to make a real impact on the decisions that shape our society. Our guests are change makers from across the UK with stories about the ways in which influence can be achieved. We focus in particular on some of the connective tissue within and between sectors for clues as how to animate place-based leadership, as innovating is a team sport best done in the open. Please contact us with feedback on the episodes, or if you would like to be a guest or have strong views on the processes of advocacy, lobbying, public campaigning, and more, unpacking how research and evidence connects with neighbourhood, local, city, regional, and national missions. I am here on a very sunny day with Cavlin Jones. Hello, Cavlin.
Hi there, Nicola.
Is it a sunny day in the valleys?
It is a sunny day. Well, it's clouding over now, but it was lovely earlier, so I'm holding on to that memory.
So, Cavlin, you're one of the Place Fellows, like myself, in the LPIP programme. Can you tell us how you became associated with this work?
So I was lucky enough to have one of my PhDs end up in City-REDI, and I'm very pleased that all my PhD students are working in academia at the moment. Long may that last. And through that connection, became aware of City-REDI's role as the aggregator of knowledge around the LPIP programme for the UK. And then when Mark informed me that there was an environmental strand of some of this work, and there's an opportunity to get involved and think about how we can better connect big blocky policies with people on the ground. That's a particular interest of mine, as it's just transition and low carbon transition generally. I was really interested. And it also fits in my other work. I'm also on the board of Natural Resources Wales, so I've got a direct interest in making sure that we manage places sustainably, so it fits all the boxes for me.
So, essentially, if you're famous for anything, you mainly work in the Welsh context and you mainly work on green, loosely defined sustainability matters. Is that right?
Well, I did also win the People's Choice Award at the International Snow Sculpting competition in Milwaukee back in 1996, but probably that's a close second to my work in Wales on really place-based and sustainable regeneration, yes.
And I mean, the whole country appears to be looking at Wales. Obviously, I'm not quite sure when this will go out, but I watched the debate, the leaders' debate last night on Channel 4. It really feels like the Welsh institutions are mature, and it feels like there is a different conversation happening in Wales. Do you recognise that there's something else going on?
I think mature from a very low base. So when we started in 1999, we had nothing. For the first decade, I think the Welsh Government was a big local authority. It was Birmingham, municipal council, writ wider, not even larger, so wider, because same sort of number of people. But you can see how with now we have tax raising powers in Wales, which we are using. So we have the new visitor levy, which is obviously relevant to this in some ways, to rural areas, and loading on council tax to try and kind of help local people afford houses and so on, and drive down a little bit this sort of second home ownership. So you see how Welsh governments are now stepping to places they were afraid to tread a few years ago, and where the institution of the Senedd, now we have 96 members instead of 60 after May 7th, will be a deeper organisation and a more powerful one in terms of its ability to understand problems and address them, I think.
And I mean, I'd done some work on fiscal devo in the Manchester context. My work's been about Manchester in the north of England. But there's a really quite chunky lot of powers. I mean, certainly the prospectuses of the various parties. Some are talking about income tax cutting. Some are talking about income tax rises. So the Lib Dems are talking about specific tax rises for the NHS and reform talking about, tax cuts for more or less everything. That such a fiscal level of conversation is a long way on, isn't it, from, as you say, being a big local authority?
Oh, absolutely. For me, one of the issues for that is I'm writing something this morning about economic and fiscal evidence and the way in which we are making many of these decisions within a kind of unitary government statistical system in the UK. The ONS and HMRC don't really, inverted commas, care about regions and nations in quite the same way as they do for Westminster. So we're doing this really with very sketchy evidence. And I think that's where things like LPIP can come in, and we have one in Wales, which obviously was very rurally oriented, and come in and start to fill some of these gaps around what places are like and what good policy looks like and what good fiscal policy looks like. And of course, the problem you have in Wales is we just don't know what would happen if we decreased income tax compared to England. It's so close. I mean, Nicola, I could throw a stone and hit England almost from my house. So if you want to move across the border to benefit from or avoid being stung by, paying income tax, that's perfectly possible in a way it's not in Scotland. So I think this is a really interesting petri dish in many ways.
It's really live, isn't it? And as I say, I think certainly in terms of English fiscal devolution, the sort of displacement argument hasn't really got off the ground as much. But I was quite shocked that as of the 7th of May, you could have radically different taxation policy in something that feels so close to home. And I don't think anybody knows what the macroeconomic context for that is, let alone the local economic development context.
No, they don't. And of course, we're lucky in Wales that obviously it's several orders of magnitude better than England. So people won't move out. You've really city to move to England from Wales, obviously. So there's that end of cultural kind of hoil that'll keep people here. But more seriously, I mean, making good public policy in a multi-level governed state, if you like, in the same way as say Spain, very complicated and tacitly kind of organized rather than formally federalized. That's really complicated. And it's hard to make good public policy. You see, when you lay a big P politics on the top of this, what will the Westminster government think about a reform government in Cardiff or a Plaid government in Cardiff when Westminster effectively holds the purse strings for Cardiff? Is a really interesting question to ask. And we may find that answered, well, it's likely we find that answered after May the 7th, because Labour is looking at on tappers in Wales.
I've certainly always known you to do work on kind of alternative industrial strategy with a bit of a green tint, is my understanding.
That's right there.
So I wonder then, if we're talking about Wales as a place, what would be the potential for that kind of work? So green transition, just transition work, reaching maturity within the arrangements that we've described and becoming embedded. And I wonder if you can think in large terms about what might change as a result and what might the size of the prize be.
So I think there's two timescales I think we're talking about and two prizes that we might be talking about. And the ultimate one might be, I mean, I did need to, even the Guardian noticed me a couple of years ago and came to chat to me in the market in Ponty. A lovely cup of coffee with Larry Elliott in the market in Ponty. And I said, look, where's the trap of capitalism? We have to find something else to do because we just can't do it. We're not very good at it. And there is certainly, I think, a move in Wales towards what is being called variously things like a well-being economy or transition economy, post-carbon economy. And that is stronger than it is in England, certainly, for lots of reasons, not least that obviously we fail at capitalism, so there's other things we need to do. Uh, Understanding how you can reorganize a region, like always a region, to deliver something radically different within nested in UK and a European system, which is fundamentally, inverted commas, capitalist. It's really difficult, right? So that's a long-term prospect about how we can think about treating our commons very differently, treating private property very differently, treating the role of maybe multi-centralized governance very differently. But those are long-term discussions which are emerging. I think in the short term, what we've seen is in the last Welsh government, I say last meaning the one that Mark Drakeford was in charge of rather than Eluned, so the last Labour government, but this one, we saw a real refocus on, if you like, local well-being when set against. My latest paper is called "The Triumph of the Placeless." The last one I wrote before I left Cardiff, and this kind of idea of placeless agents who kind of inverted commas come into Wales, or in many ways move from Cardiff to Pembrokeshire, just the same sort of thing in this context, and who drive out or outcompete local communities. Okay, there's stuff around having a visitor levy on tourism businesses, having a loading on empty homes or second homes of up to 300%, having a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit so that people aren't overwhelmed by traffic through their villages, not having a new M4 relief road. All those decisions individually have their own rationales and excuses and political trade-offs, as we definitely saw with the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. But they speak to a government which is recognizing that as a periphery, full of people or predominantly filled with people who are economically weak, culturally don't have much connection with the Westminster government, there can be a tendency for local populations to come off worse, whether that's people who want to send their kids to a local school or want their children to be able to buy a local house, or farmers want to be able to sell their produce into a functioning market and not go into a debt to buy a huge new truck there with some American company, or people who feel that very valid at the moment. Currently, for example, huge protests emerging mid Wales around the siting of pylons for renewables, which are being pulled together as part of effectively a private electricity network owned by a company which is not Welsh. So you can see how there's lots of forces which are inverted commas non-local forces, which have pressed on embedded communities. And I think the Welsh government, that Mark Drakeford, seemed to recognise that. Lee Waters, the former minister, was a big part of this as well, and respond to that in ways which try to shore up and focus on local embedded communities and people towards the lower end of the income scale. A good example of this is Wales is the first country, I think, in the UK to have a pilot for universal basic income, albeit just for care leavers. It wasn't universal for people leaving care. But there was a very strong focus on, okay, there are people now leaving care homes, going out in the big wide world. What can we do to make their lives better and easier? Let's see what a UBI might do. So I think we saw definite stirrings towards what we might call a wellbeing economy, and a recognition that the UK settled form of mixed economy hadn't done us that many favours. We wanted something slightly different. Now, what will happen after May the 7th is anybody's guess.
I think what's fascinating, and again, as a fellow traveller thinking about growth and governance beyond growth after growth, is that UK PLC hasn't managed to string together, sustained quarters of growth for 2 decades now. Quite a lot of the subnational conversation just gets more and more boosterist and shrill.
Yeah.
But you're asking people, you're taking people for fools if you continue with a very boosterist set of rhetorics that aren't then reflected in the lived experience of people, and certainly people lower down the income scale. I mean, I've got endless frustrations with Northern Powerhouse and all the rest of it, because we have very similar dynamics to those you describe. We have older, iller people further from the labour market, yet this boosterist language, which it doesn't even succeed in its own terms, let alone succeeding in the terms that we've.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's really interesting that there seems to be nothing but a doubling down on what feels to me like old-fashioned language and old-fashioned interventions. I mean, we're not talking about UK situation here because we're talking about local places, but when I read the Modern Industrial Strategy, came out last year, I thought I could have written that in 2001, and Gordon Brown probably did, because there doesn't seem to be a way for UK government, at least, to get off this merry-go-round of always promising, always using the same tools, always looking at the same, again, and you can see how, the way in which GDP measure, which ONS briefly took into beyond GDP, which was around income redistribution, it was around green growth, now is narrowing back to talking just about growth as we would, understood it 30, 40, 50 years ago. And I think that's really interesting when, I mean, you talk about obviously the older and iller populations that you have in suburban Manchester in the same way as you have in the suburbs of Cardiff and the valleys. If you look at Barcelona, over tourism in Barcelona, the people who are shooting water kisses the tourists aren't necessarily those who are economically disadvantaged. The people who feel they do not have a stake in their city in the way that they did and should have because they are long-standing residents. So I think there are lots of people, lots of the people arguing now against renewables or renewables infrastructure, at least in Wales, are very well to do. There are people who feel that things are being done to them. And of course, the problem with the approach of, let's have an AI's cluster here, and let's have a free port there. Is you do that to people, not with people, because the tools are so generic, blocky, not amenable to softening for different places. Despite what you might say, if you're going to have an AI cluster, there'll be a bloody big server farm and a load of electricity and water going in. That'll be it. You can't make it place-based. So it's very difficult to bend to square that circle, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think, well, exactly, data centers being a necessary evil. Well, at the moment they are the economic strategy. Anyway, let's not have a council of despair. That would be ridiculous. I mean, I've followed the universal basic income pilot with great interest in Wales. Has that been developed further for care leavers? Is it established?
Well, I mean, not at the moment. I mean, these things are always constrained by Senate terms, parliamentary terms. I think the learnings are still being digested. The makeup of the next Senate will be crucial in where any of this goes. I mean, I'm hopeful because it looks like we will have a government in Wales because of the political dynamics. Even if Reform are the biggest party, it's much more likely we have a progressive leftish government, whether that's Green Plaid, Applied Labour, some kind of rainbow coalition. It's very likely we'll have something which is in that progressive space, which would mean that interventions like the care, the USUBI, could progress to a next level and maybe develop into something a little more um, widely distributed or impactful. The problem will be for us in Wales. The Labour Party will be hurting so much, I think, after 27 years in power and not anymore. It's hard to see how far they will be able to contribute their experiences to developing things which are already in train. And of course, I think none of the Plaid shadow front bench have had any experience of government. The last time the government was 2010, I think, with Labour officially, and they've all gone now. So they'll be completely neophytes. And you tell my civil service friends, batten down the hatches because you will be really important. You'll be the only people who know anything. Whoever gets in, whether it's reform or Plaid, most of our Labour front benchers are retiring anyway from the Senate, so apart from Lee Ned and one or two others are all going anyway. So we will have a bunch of kids running the country for the first 6 months. And how that shapes, nobody really knows. And that will really determine how far we'll be able to progress towards a more sophisticated and nuanced policy making as opposed to baby's bathwater and starting over again.
Okay, so let's not have a council of despair. Can you describe something that you've been involved in that's worked particularly well in this space that we're describing? And what were the characteristics of this story? Was it about resource, people? Was it about the politics being right? Was it about having a longevity or profile? Yeah, what reasons to be cheerful?
There's two things that come to mind at either end of Wales, really, and they're both similar in origin, I guess, although different in theme and structure. So if you go to Northwest Wales, you will see quite a lot of pipes running down the hillsides, from very high lakes down to the valleys. And those pipes are carrying water, which run turbines, which then create electricity through micro hydro schemes. And quite a lot of those schemes are owned by local community interest companies, social enterprises, because there was an ability to bring investment into community schemes up until 2015, which was a clear win for places that were maybe economically peripheral, but geologically and topographically interesting. Lots of valleys, lots of hills, got a benefit here. And it wasn't grasped by the big energy companies, 'cause it was too small. So lots of people in those very Cymraeg speaking communities, these are, these are proper heartlands of the Cymro, where people speak Welsh. They've pulled together and have developed a range of social enterprises on the kind of Bro Festiniog brand, if you like, which include not just renewable energy, but owning hotels, owning mountain biking trails, doing lots of social interventions, doing work for the council around social care and so on. And that is an example of where you can see that a population it's split in many ways. Some of these are very leafy, nice green places in Northwest Wales. Some are post-industrial slate valleys, by Stiniog being the obvious example there. But there are other places which are economically much more challenged. But there, the iaith, the Cymraeg, the language, has pulled together people in a way which is oriented then to thinking, what do we need to do to make sure our families can stay together and our children can, if they want, stay and have a future in this place? And that has been successful. There are now, I think, 30, 35, 40 community enterprises under the umbrella, the kind of Professional umbrella. And you can see how in the niches are tourism, the niches are energy, niches are social care, the niches are things that larger conglomerates didn't care about. You can build viable enterprises which are nonetheless not profit, very community embedded. That's my first example of something which has been really heartening. And whenever I go up there, I'm doubly ashamed I can't speak Welsh because you feel you can't understand what's going on unless you do it in Welsh. It's genuinely interesting, totally understandable in a different language because the way in which it's narrated is integral to how it's understood, which is very interesting. I never was much close to home. It's in the Rhondda Valley, so it's from what I call the posh one. There are two Rhondas, Rhondda Farc, Rhondda Fawr, the Little Rhondda and Big Rhondda. I'm from Rhondda Farc, is the little one. The Big Rhondda had the train line, had a leisure centre, had all sorts of amenities in the 9th century. In the Rhondda Fawr, there's a place called Treherbert right at the top, and there's a social enterprise called Welcome to Our Woods, and they've been agitating for the economic, social well-being feature of Treherbert for 50 years. Initially by getting people back onto the mountainside to just walk, just be in touch with nature, to dealing with their social prescribing, dealing with their, getting very post-industrial community, very poor community, dealing with that stress by getting out and retaking the landscape. And eventually from that has emerged through, again, a raft of different organizations and interventions. Not only people who are walking much more and using and fishing in their countryside. This is largely public-owned forestry estate. There is now a joint management plan between National Resources Wales, which I'm involved in, and the local community. So that landscape will be managed jointly with the local community for the next 30 years, 50 years. There's a sawmill, a community-owned sawmill in Treherbert, which will be making wood products for sale locally, from hopefully eventually from the local wood. There's a new education establishment there. Brand new college called Black Mountains College, based in Mid Wales, has opened a campus in Treherbert to deliver socially responsible, interesting craft and other education, sustainable food, growing, all sorts of interesting, future orientated, post carbon, local embedded education up to degree level in a valleys community, which is what, 6,000 people strong. There's a real buzz and a real feel that this is something interesting. So Treherbert, it's the last Valleys village before you get into effective Mid Wales and what we call waterfall country, which is sort of Brecon up towards then the great expanses. Very recreationally interesting. There is, however, an electric train, which will have 4 trains an hour from Cardiff up to Treherbert. It's the obvious jumping off point for things like mountain biking, walking. They're talking about trying to reopen a railway tunnel through the hillside for cycle recreation as a cycle path. So you can see how, in that case, a very deprived community can again look around and say, what are our resources? What do we have? Beautiful landscape, land we can have some influence over through because it's publicly owned, um, community which is engaged in doing the right thing, bring in interested wider organizations. I was up there a few weeks ago talking to Rewilding UK about what Rewilding UK can do in this area, nature investment zones, all that kind of stuff. So you can see how when you've got genuinely enthused and engaged local people who have a good set of people around them and are well engaged with wider interested and interesting organizations, stuff can happen in very small, very out of the way places.
So, asset-based community development, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so, but assets in the wider sense. I mean, and really these are the landscape is the asset, the geographic position is the asset. The fact it's far enough away from Cardiff to feel really different and really wild, but at the same time, it's, I think, 45 minutes on a train. So all that stuff comes together, and that's the thing. And Truro is unique. You wouldn't do that in the same way in a different place. Be a different set of assets, different overlapping set of assets that you would use to build a different future in the same way as Hay and White can be a book town. You can only have one in Wales, really. You know.
And you mentioned already the complex devolution settlements in Spain, in Catalonia, Spain, Barcelona. Can you think of a good international lesson that you'd like to import or steal for Wales?
Well, that's really interesting. I want to say in a bit of a strange way, really. So I've done a lot of work in the Basque Country, which is a very autonomous, the most autonomous region of Spain. It doesn't have any financial dependency on Madrid, keeps all its own taxes, it raises all its own taxes, keeps all its own taxes, it pays a little stipend for diplomatic services, I think, Madrid and one or other bits and pieces. It's moved from being one of the poorest regions in Spain in the 1970s, post-Franco, to being the second richest behind only Madrid in the last 50 years. Done fantastically well. I will there a lot, as much as I can get over there to see and understand. I'm very good friends with lots of people who work in public policy and in research, innovation, strategy there. And when I came back a few years ago and I did a presentation, somebody said to me, what are the lessons uh, for the from the Basque Country for Wales? I said, be Basque, because these people were chasing whales, WHALES, across the Atlantic 500 years ago, when we were still very much an insular set of communities across Wales. The Basques were outward looking. In fact, a Basque person was the first person to sail all the way around the world, because I think it was Magellan, was it? He died before he got back, but the Basque captain of the ship didn't. So he's actually the person who got all the way around first. Um, and you can't adopt the lessons you see in other places for here, because they are culturally specific. So I'm writing something at the moment on better fiscal evidence, better economic evidence, and better policy making. If you look at how the Basque, for example, do their research, so the city region version in the Basque Country is the orchestra. It's a competitiveness and innovation institute, and they serve the Basque Country, which is 2.2 million people. So similar sort of size as Birmingham, if you like. And that organisation has been going for 20 years rather than the 10 or so of City-REDI. But what it benefits from is a coherence around economic strategy, long-term economic strategy, and a settled view of, I guess, leaving the extremes aside, what the Basque Country should look like. That simply doesn't really exist in the UK or in its constituent parts. So you couldn't reinvent orchestra in Birmingham or Cardiff or Wales, because there isn't that. I could come back to the maturity of the polity. The Basques, were an autonomous region. Even the Romans, I think, didn't really manage to fully conquer them. Napoleon left them alone, so they've been on their own, doing their thing and inventing their own laws for 1,000 years. And in Wales, we lost our laws, however, 1,000 years ago. So we are building back. And I think it's dangerous to look at international structures and think you can import them. What you can do, I think, is look at behaviors and think about how they might fit. So what I would say is, if you look at places like the Basque Country, or maybe Quebec to some regard, you might see a focus on long-term plan making, strategizing, which doesn't exist in the UK or in Wales. You might see, certainly in the Canadian case, a focus on foundational data and evidence, and cementing the importance of data and evidence and research into policy making in a way that I really bemoan in the UK. Ministers can announce anything, irrespective of whether it's actually measurable or not. And that drives me absolutely nuts. And that tends to happen less in other places. So I think you can take behaviors from other places and adapt them for our context, rather than thinking that the way in which things are done can simply be plonked and will work.
It's a very good lesson against simple policy mobility. But you're right, sort of a deep understanding of culture and a mere 1,000 years of bus dynamics, I'm sure, would help us.
That's right there. We'll be there straight away.
So we've spoken quite a lot about you are a freelance gentleman these days.
Yeah, yes.
What are you working on next?
Next, well, I have to finish my LPIP fellowship work for the rest of this year, certainly. So I'll be talking to people about the Welsh Marches, that interesting region between Wales and England, for the next few months, understanding people's views on its resilience, its future, what that place should look like. That'll be really interesting. Beyond that, there's the possibility of a bid to a large foundation looking at what well-being measurement looks like in a place like Wales. Again, this would be Wales-based, because we have a Well-being Act in Wales, the Future Generations Act we call it, which talks about our need to husband and steward Wales to make sure that the well-being of future generations is protected. And how we measure that is very interesting. I think I'll be thinking about that quite a lot if we manage to win this project. So those are two things that I think are very interesting. The other thing I'm doing, which is a little more out there, is I'll be looking at the economic impact of the half marathon in Cardiff in October. I may even be tempted to do it myself, although I'll require a hell of a lot of training in the next 6 months. So yes, I have my PhD. People are surprised to find out I've got a PhD in sports economics. So I try and keep my hand in with a little bit of sports economics and now and then started becoming a later this year. But the best thing about being freelance, of course, is I'll do what interests me when opportunities arise. There's something futures oriented about the way I work or would like to work, which always stays. So I'm pressing at the moment and will press after the election for future generations lab for Wales. We don't have any way of envisaging the future in Wales. We don't have any idea where we want to go, how we get there, what levers we pull now to make that thing happen in 20 years' time. So I think in the longer term, my focus around not not future skills, which is often kind of narrowed down to, but futures appropriate orientations, futures appropriate structures, futures appropriate behaviours, and making sure that when we make policy, we do it with an eye on what will happen generations down the line rather than now. That's what I'd like to carry on being involved in, really.
I think that sounds like enough to keep you occupied. As you know, in LPIP, we work with decision makers, with researchers. So I'm going to ask now if you can think of someone who's a really good broker. And in that sense, I really mean that is great at taking knowledge, data, evidence, and translating it for another audience. So obviously you do get some political leaders who are good brokers, but they're more the place leaders into whom a good broker might dock with evidence.
Yeah.
So in my sort of formulation, can you think of somebody specific who's a really good broker of new knowledge and data and ideas?
I'm I'm a bit self-serving here because this gentleman once interviewed me for a television program. I'm going to say Michael Sheen, because Michael Sheen is somebody who is interested enough to look into what is often a complicated cultural social issue, and he doesn't have to do this. He's man's a millionaire, he do what he likes, and wander around with his family. He has, and this is a bit of an education as well, how we're talking, but he understands that where a problem exists, you have to look into that problem, understand its nuances, where the dysfunction originates. Think about how you might translate that into, in his case, a very, very wide audience. So when you look at the two things he's been involved in, which are more recent, I guess, the work he's done on indebtedness and trying to address the indebtedness of people who are on a treadmill they can't get off, and then making a TV program to expose the structures which lead to this indebtedness. Well, very interesting. And required that translation of, if you like, misery into hope. This is a terrible problem. We can do things about it. These people, who are people just like us, can be helped. If only X, Y, and Z. That was always really interesting. And of course, his new endeavor, which is slightly different, but again, his understanding that there was a lack of English language theatre in Wales that needed addressing, and he's addressed it. I think it's just not necessarily broking in that case; it's just doing. But sometimes being a pure broker isn't enough. You have to have skin in the game. The word entrepreneur means enter and take, which is interesting given how positively we kind of view entrepreneurs in the UK. And I think broking can sometimes be similarly problematic if you don't have skin in the
Which I
game.
think is probably more.
So I think wherever you are thinking about broking, you have to think about whether that the decisions made or the interactions made or the processes undergone have consequence for the broker. Another example would be Lee Waters, a minister in the former government who, with a 20 mile speed limit, saw the evidence that it would work, and it has worked in terms of saving lives, reducing serious injuries, reducing insurance premiums, and took that and actually, in his vision, made a decision and effectively ruined his political career. I think it probably ruined his mental health as well along the way, I would imagine, given this trouble he got into for that. But so I think there's something about broking which requires either an intrinsic desire to see things be better or some sort of extrinsic skin in the game, which means you're not going to do it badly. And that's not a very good answer. That's the only one I've got for you, Nick.
It's brilliant. Right. So we've had a place leader who, as you say, really suffered with the implementation of the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. Although that is definitely part of the ongoing conversation, like to roll it back would be quite hard. So, who else, from your experience, is a really good place leader?
And going back to the example I gave you earlier, which is my mate Ian, who leads Welcome to Our Woods, the community enterprise I talked about in Treherbert and the Rhondda Valleys. He was born in the Valleys, moved away to, I think, Luton or somewhere north of London when he was about 3. So he has a, frankly, if he listens to this, I'm sorry, but if you're a horrific accent, right? Awful. Came back as an adult and thought, oh, this place needs a bit of work. I think I could help. And for the last 15 years, and has worked not from a position of being professionally well connected, not from a position of having loads and loads of capacities and skills and orientations towards bringing people together and being, this kind of broker, mover and shaker, starting from a very low base of, just want to do something to make the place better. So people like Ian, I think, would be our best case scenario because they are clearly immune to the sorts of criticisms of people from populist parties who might say, well, this is just either people coming doing things to us, or this is gentrification of Hastings, or these people coming out from London and they're only here on the weekend. So there's that kind of being all over the place when you're a place leader, I think gives you an in a way which is difficult to have if you are, you know, a bit more remote. So I mean, Ian, who's also a lovely guy, would be my number one, I think. I mean, there are other people who have. There's a gentleman called Chris Blake who's also been involved with Treherbert, but he's way up the road in Talgarth, who's involved in the community-owned bakery in Talgarth. He's installed a lot of micro hydro schemes, and he's now involved in thinking about how we kind of retake the commons for better use, so the other commons of Wales. And Chris, again, worked in finance for decades, realised what he was doing was maybe not necessarily the most um, socially useful thing, and has no need to do what he does, but does it. And what he does is, and like Ian was very place embedded, Chris will look for where he can make improvements. He's very involved in Black Mountains College. He looked for where he can take his skill set and adopt it and address it and use it with other people in different scenarios to make things better. He just does stuff where he thinks he can make the most difference.
Thank you very much. I'm going to let you, before we leave, let you have a wave of my place-based innovation magic wand. You're going to be careful with it. It can grant you a powerful wish to do one of these things, but you must use your powers to make a tangible change to a specific place. Your change will be specific, measurable, actionable, recordable, and transferable. Smart. Magic is hard to get hold of at the moment and is subject to a 20% reducing multi-year budget settlement. Calvin, you can have £10 million in a project fund. You can have half an hour with the cabinet and a slide deck. It seems like you've got your links into the Senate well sorted. So that's UK level. Translating your Welsh example to the UK cabinet. You can have editorial control of the front page of a tabloid newspaper. A clause to insert into a bill. And again, that can be a Senate bill or a Westminster bill. You can have a simple message to go viral on TikTok. You can have anyone as an advocate for your work, or, and this was just for the real pure nerds out there, the answer to a question that's bothered you forever. Which would you like?
So until about a year ago, I would have said a half hour with the cabinet to talk about HM Treasury discount rate and how bad it is for future investment. But they're sorting that now, so I can leave that to one side because they're revising the discount rate. So that's one magic tick I've got from nothing. So I'm going to insert the clause into a bill, and I'm going to have a brand new well, I'm going to have two bills. I'm going to have a planning bill for Wales and one for England because I'm doing work in the marches, so I need both of them.
Yep.
And there would be a clause that we don't make any decisions about places without a up-to-date, fully fleshed out, multi-layered, holistic land use map and plan.
Oh, amen.
Because we are so bad in Britain, and probably in Northern Ireland and elsewhere, about putting things in the right places next to the right people, and then putting the people where they should be to make use of those things, making sure that the animals aren't in the way, and that the flora aren't trampled over, and that the emissions go in the right place, and that the water runs cleanly through these places. And it drives me absolutely nuts that we make decisions with very limited information on how it affects catchments, landscapes, places. So my wish would be a bloody fantastic land use map and hence plan for Wales and England, and why not Scotland and Northern Ireland as well?
You're really preaching to the choir. I have thought from every angle why it is that we sort of disdain planning in this country. I do not understand it, because obviously I used to teach planners and all the rest of it and got great respect for it, but it just somehow, that wider piece around resources, widest, natural resources management, it just never connects to land use. And I think
That's absolutely right.
there's the sort of the queasiness maybe about ownership. I don't know what it is.
Where
And
it's interesting because there's a new land use plan for England, rural
yeah,
England, which will leave 80% of the land alone.
yeah.
And you think, why bother? If farmers are going to carry on farming, why waste your time? So yes, there's definitely a queasiness there for some reason about putting your fingers into things, isn't there?
We're certainly not a nation of planners, are we?
Definitely not. No.
Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed that. I will be making you king of the world forthwith.
Hey, hooray! I'll quote that.
It's been lovely to. Well, it was a phrase that you used in the Michael Sheen example. You take, a whole series of miseries and woes, and you turn them into hope, and that we all need a bit of that, I think.
Absolutely, we get it.